Hello, my friends. I hope you are holding on to your hats, bats, and coat hangers because this 2020, it has. Well, the timeline has shoved about 5 years worth of news, 10 years worth of news into the space of 6 months. We are halfway through the year of the rat, according to the lunar or Chinese New Year calendar, which is a chaotic year to say the least, and supposedly in their canon too, it is a year of change, shall we say. But today we are joined with our good friend Rupert August. He's a poet and a commentator, and of course, quite brushed up on the old economics, so you can keep us in the Nine Diamonds Watch network up to speed. You'll know where to get the finest meme stocks with our good friend Rupert. How are you doing today?
I am doing very well. Trying to keep up with all the news, but even though we're only going to be covering not even an entire continent, there's going to be quite a lot to get through.
Indeed, yes. Do you want to start us off?
Yes, certainly. So I didn't catch if you mentioned this already, but we're going to be talking about China today. It's
Yes.
quite interesting because in our last chat, one of the points that we were in a little bit of disagreement on is what China was going to do going forward, and so it's quite interesting that events have come up, such as the announcing of the vision of a new federal state of China by one Guo Wengui. Sorry for butchering his name, most likely. Um, but he's a very wealthy businessman who is currently in exile, and he made an announcement on I think it was on the eve of the anniversary of the Tiananmen Square incident, which affected him personally quite deeply. So I think that's part of his motivation for obviously picking that time, and then also
What
for
was
being
that?
involved in this project in
What was
the
that
first
that
instance.
what was that you said that deeply affected him?
The Tiananmen Square incident.
No, I mean what happened? Why did it affect him? Do you know specifically or
Oh, because he was present at it. He witnessed it himself.
right, I see. Oh, okay, of course. Sorry, I misunderstood that part. But yeah, if he was there himself, I'm sure he feels pretty passionate about it. Now, I believe that these guys are linked to a larger, I guess you would say, they're not really nationalists, but they definitely lean towards the Kuomintang or the previous uh, ideological framework, the nationalist framework before the communist revolution in China, right? These guys, they are nostalgic for this kind of period. They consider this to be true Chinese history and so forth. And this new federal state of China movement appears to be linked to not only the Falun Gong guys, but also a couple of other Chinese dissidents too. I've got my eyes on Ai Weiwei because he's the only Chinese artist that ever makes any waves these days, which is quite funny. But yeah, how is it looking with this new federal state of China from here?
Well, as far as I know, it's only really been announced so far. There hasn't been that much set in stone and that much actually done. But the fact that it is being announced, especially at a time like this, um, people more versed on this subject, more specifically than I, have suggested that some of the entities which are pumping money into the Hong Kong protests are also working with the new federal state project behind the scenes. Some of which may even include dissident members of the party itself, because I don't know how aware you are of uh, the internal mechanisms of the party and how corrupt it is, but suffice to say, there's a lot more um, freedom of movement, especially at the regional level, than you might think.
Okay. No,
So,
I can't say I'm particularly well versed in that. I always have a very global and macro view when it comes to. We are talking about the government of China and not Hong Kong here, right?
yes, correct.
Right. Okay.
Um, but we hear a lot about the different mechanisms that the Chinese state has for controlling individual citizens and preventing mass movements,
Yes, of
which
course. Yeah.
yeah, all of that is quite robust. However, at the level of the local governor and anybody within the party who has any modicum of power, especially at the local level, the mechanisms for actually being able to control those people are very lax indeed. It's things like I was just reading earlier about how a lot of the regulatory regimes don't have any proper central enforcement. So it simply becomes another tool in the arsenal of local governors to use as they wish. And as they wish usually includes money to themselves and their allies to turn a blind eye, or things like that.
Yes, of course. Yeah, we saw that with their fake vaccine and what do you? It was milk formula, baby milk formula. There was vaccines that killed rounds of people. It disappeared after being suppressed in the news and then getting out through social media. And then there was also the same thing with a milk milk powder, milk formula scandal where babies were dying because they had been fed such terrible stuff. And, they paraded out a few employees of these companies in order to, like, make a show and whatever. But shortly afterwards, the CEOs of these companies themselves are they're still functioning. They aren't held accountable, and that is something that we see in the West, but the way that it plays out in China is quite opaque in how hierarchical and nepotistic it tends to be within party membership.
Yes, exactly. Another thing that I'd heard from a good friend of mine who is quite somewhat acquainted with Chinese matters himself as well, is that I've tried to look this up myself, but apparently the wet markets that have been receiving so much criticism recently in the wake of the whole coronavirus situation, this would not be the first time they've tried to ban them. It's just that the central government, which actually wants to see them banned, does not have the local enforcement mechanisms, nor the loyalty of the people who they would be relying on to actually carry this out.
That's true.
Because the amount of power that they can wield over a lot of the provincial states in particular, or regions in particular, is actually quite lax indeed, which opens up a pretty enormous scope for being able to, make something like the new federal state of China project work. And again, that might actually be where some of the funding and support for this Hong Kong protest is actually coming from.
Right, yes. I mean, if you were involved in such a thing, or a pro-democracy, or a pro-free market, or a pro-liberty, or just want to get back at the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, whatever it is, right? They've made a lot of enemies recently, and not only that, but as we know, states that are at the top of the chain, they are in the business of keeping out the competition and maintaining their power. So if someone's having a protest, such as we see now in the US, right, they're going to want to highlight the negative aspects of that as maybe a way to get back at people geopolitically. You can mobilize. So, I mean, now, here in 2020, to say this seems like Mr. Captain Obvious dropping a line here, but it's to see the power and the rate of which social media spread news, and how now, even in the West, people know to whip out the camera phone straight away and be filming, be streaming, whatever, and you can often get multiple takes of that certain bad arrest that they made in the USA recently. That has led to all of this current chaos. But I mean, you see it with Hong Kong footage now. I mean, how long can a centralized system like the CCP that actively lies to its people, and it's, from what I understand now, its people know that it is lying, but they seem to have a loyalty just out of, well, I guess you could say, in-group cultural and ethnic pride. But yes, I see a lot of potential for a new system in China, and obviously I'd like to see some kind of soft or even hard revolution take place in China, but I don't think like a hot war would be the kind of thing that would kick off in China. What do you think?
I think we are seeing the potential factors line up for such a thing, but it would certainly be quite difficult to manifest. But just because, as I understand it, the governors don't really have much in the way of their own sort of militias, paramilitaries, or access to regular army units.
Yes, that's correct.
That's all in the hands of the central government. So if anything were to take place, it would have to happen in a very backdoor manner, and appear more like a coup, or
Yes.
some kind of internal party mechanisms that create an internal coup via that method.
And that is truly the weakness of pretty much every centralized elite, and it is the relationship between the military and whoever holds power. At the end of the day, I mean, a bit biased being currently based in Thailand, but there's a military coup here in history, time and time and time again. It doesn't matter if it's a kingship system, sorry, a kingdom monarchy based system or royalty. There's no queens allowed though in this system. It's quite funny, but yeah, or a democracy. There's a coup every 5 years, 2 years or so. But I mean, it's been quite stable recently because the military managed to very successfully coup and then. Well, I don't know. Well, it's not illegal to say that they kind of faked the election and cleaned up all the seats, but it's a very effective way. And I would say this: people in the West need to be paying attention to winning over the sympathies of non-commissioned and commissioned officers, and that's all I'll say. Because you want those people on your side more than anyone, unless you want to live in this fantasy world of kumbaya, pull the statue down, and then pretend that nobody can see the spectrum of colour in front of them, right? If you want to play by those rules, be ready to be taken advantage of. We've just had, and this is a real dire tangent here, I apologise, but I'm compelled. I was just looking at Dijon, Dijon, Dijon in France,
Yeah,
and they
Dijon.
have an Arab and Chechen ethnic gang dispute that's been going on for at least 3 days with real guns, real ammunitions, vehicles being used in combat in the streets, and French citizens of all types and whatever, but specifically the natives, right? Filming out of their window, people brandishing guns, shooting up into the air like it's some kind of Libyan wedding. And by the way, that's not a joke. They do that at Libyan weddings. They shoot up into the air. Same in Pakistan. But yes, when it comes back to, sorry to really jump off the deep end there, but I'm compelled to express the data points as fast as they are machine gun datas. With this federal new state of China, it looks like the kind of thing that many kind of globalist or Western forces, should you say, would be able to, well, globalist that echoes and globalist in terms of just free trading and maybe an international megacorp style of thing, right? But it looks like the kind of thing that those guys would support over the CCP. What do you think about that? Do you think this is something that is appealing to the Western powers? A new
Well,
federal state of China?
here's where some of the interesting geopolitics gets brought in then, because I don't think that ideology is so much of a factor here on that end of things.
I
So
agree.
I think that just by the fact that they can work with China as it currently is makes the government form basically irrelevant. In fact, probably the fact that it's corrupt and pliable to general sort of interests, globalist interests, makes it a much more reliable ally than some of the other possibilities. And so they would oppose the new federal state of China simply on the basis that it's opposing their ally. As simple as that, really.
Yeah, I see. Also, change and non-status quo, something jumping up, bottoming out, there being a war or there being some kind of instability, that always scares off market forces and people who have investments or their shiny, shiny products and Apple gizmos coming from China, right? So.
Well, not only that, but historically, even when communications were much less prolific than they are now and much less developed than they are now, one revolution in a major country is swiftly followed by many others. It acts as a kind of catalyst to get things moving in other countries. And you can look at that in a number of ways. So you can take the view that was spurred by a similar interest, in a kind of secret society behind the out of the public eye kind of perspective, that it was all planned ahead of time. Or
Illuminati, Masons, monotheistic, secret cult
exactly.
people, those guys? Okay.
Yeah. Or you can look at it from the perspective of, populations which were kind of already latently in support of. So specifically, I would be referring to 1830 and 1848. in both of those cases, you had large contingents of liberal populations in these countries that were just kind of like waiting for an opportunity.
Yeah,
And thus,
any
as soon as
excuse to kick off and get it rolling, yes.
yeah. So as soon as France catches fire, everybody's just immediately on it.
Yeah, and well, obviously fire spreads high vibration, it travels further, and now I guess you can directly say that this contributes mimetic energy, idea energy, and the way that people can present this stuff. Everybody can give their own spin, their own take, their own raw emotion, their own deceit, their own, selective clipping of images or video and so forth. The I mean, we all have a media factory, a media firm at our fingertips nowadays, especially if you've got some of the nice Adobe or faster hardware. You can really get some beautiful stuff aggregated and cast out there as quickly as you can come up with it in some cases. And you've got to think when boomers and the Gen X, even though Gen X are quite tech savvy as it is compared to boomers, right? You've got to think about how developed this is going to become when you have more seniority with even more tech savvy people. Are we going to be looking at, just very devious humans who are going to be designing this future? Or are they going to hand it over to automated intelligence? Just as a quick side note, it's definitely related to China, though. Do you think China are going to be the first to get to some kind of policy integrated AI? I mean, something like, they've already got a social credit score system, right? And in addition to that, would they have do you think they're more likely to be the population to apply like an AI overseer to manage that kind of system?
It does seem like China are much more comfortable with this technology than anybody else.
It
But
seems like
on
they
the other
don't
hand,
even have to ask, right?
yeah. But on the other hand, they also kind of lack quite the same level of capability that America does. So, in the case of America, they could almost practically stumble into it, whereas China would have to put a lot of resources into it over a large period of time
Oh,
in order to make that a reality.
you mean conceiving a true artificial intelligence?
I mean, just in terms of like raw, innovative capacity to create these kinds of the kind of systems and mechanisms and the technologies that would be required to bring this into fruition.
Yeah, I mean, basically at the moment, their social credit systems like, I don't know, Tinder for Big Brother or something like that.
Yeah, but so all of the things being equal, if everybody had access to this technology, and it was simply a matter of choosing the policy, then yes, definitely China would be much more quick off the mark. But in terms of developing that technology, I think countries like the US have a significant head start on that, and so it might just be the US because of a certain amount of entropy, I suppose.
Are we done with Peking duck? Shall we head on over to some Hong Kong? I don't know, what do they have in Hong Kong? French fries? McDonald's? Western things? Non-Chinese things?
Yes, and a lot of banks.
Whoa, that sounds interesting. Why do they have so many banks in Hong Kong?
I think it's just because it became effectively the financial hub of China. So when China was being financially colonized, I guess, in the 20th century, 19th and 20th century, Shanghai was opened up as a free city, and obviously Hong Kong was also by de facto. And so what that meant was that you had these two places in particular, but also a couple of other little outposts, because obviously a load of different countries all snatched cities and ports and things during the yes. And so those two places ended up being hubs for financial activity. A lot of Western firms pouring in cash to take advantage of the situation in China.
Indeed. And do you know what they were up to last week in Hong Kong? They were throwing umbrellas and yellow hard hats at the police again. You know, I really do think that this is a losing long term battle that they are fighting. But if you've got outside forces pushing for some kind of soft coup, for some kind of independence for Hong Kong that might come to fruition, I don't really see China ever taking Taiwan, even though they pretend to gear up for it all the time and stuff. So, but yeah, what's been going on with Hong Kong in terms of your spheres recently?
Well, in terms of, so to pick up on what you said, obviously Hong Kong, the protests in Hong Kong are definitely not going to unseat the central Chinese government. Certainly not via some kind of mass movement, not least because of the cultural distance between the Hong Kongers and the mainland Chinese
Yes,
wider
and
population.
sorry, just to jump in there, those, like, the mainland is fully aware that Hong Kong wants to be, there's like a young millennial movement of Hong Kongers who want to be either maintain their two systems thing until 2040, but really what they want is like separation. They don't want their internet and their pornography turning off like they have in China. So VPNs and so forth will be a bit more of a concern than before. But sorry, do continue.
Well, yeah. So effectively, that there's a gap between these two populations, and so they don't the mainland Chinese population, especially the poorer people, are not going to be viewing the situation in Hong Kong as an attack on them, and thus something that they should align themselves with. So it's very much an isolated movement, as far as I can tell, except where there might be possible sort of elite interests, as we briefly mentioned earlier, that may be aligned with the Hong Kong protests for other reasons, for their own gain, effectively. So I think that's where things get more interesting, because in the wider view, what we might be seeing is kind of one of two things that aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. Um, the ongoing kind of Hong Kong protest situation might be either just a remaining open sore that kind of gets at the central Chinese government and continually shows that they are at least somewhat unable to control the situation fully, and
Yeah,
it
it just
goes some way
bitch
towards.
slaps them straight across the face and reminds them that they're not as powerful as they think they are. Look at how measured their police have to be. With all the press watching, with all local Hong Kongers just looking for an excuse to shout brutality, their police are actually very measured compared to the USA. And some people won't like to hear the reality of the situation, but yeah, in the US, the police are allowed to club you a lot harder than they are in Hong Kong. But not to say that Hong Kong is being soft. It certainly isn't this second time around.
That is quite a funny little data point, but yeah. More specifically, it does get at Xi Jinping. Is that how you
Xi
pronounce his name?
Jinping, yes.
Yes, at his credibility and his tenure, because things in the last couple of years, well, not even, things in the last year to 6 months have really taken a downward turn for him, and so that might be, to go back again, what is causing the uptick in dissent against him in particular. So it may be that this is all just some big play to unseat him, replace him with someone else from the opposing faction, and then the CCP continues as normal.
Yeah.
So this, going back to the new federal state of China, that might just be another factor in this whole internal power struggle. But the other thing that might be going on is that the new federal state of China is actually the goal, rather than some kind of internal power struggle so much. And the Hong Kong protest to that end then would be a distraction, because it's a completely different kind of threat that's being presented and that needs to be combated, and that is taking the attention away from other things that are going on in the more relevant realm of kind of middle and lower elite politics that's trying to create some kind of coup, some kind of internal coup.
God, I hope so. It'd be really cool to see that play out nowadays with social media. I'd really like to see an open Chinese internet just for the pure sake of watching Chinese communist nationalism get absolutely blown apart by their own by their own truth. I guess you should say. I really do think that if people wanted to destabilize something like China right now, it's mimetic ops. You have to be spraying memes at them in their own language. Hong Kongers could be taking up this approach rather than simply resisting what's going on in their city, you know? I think, what do you need? A couple USBs with some Western shows on it? I mean, is it North Korea where you can trade a USB stick with the latest Korean series from South Korea on for something like extra rations or whatever? I wonder how those guys are handling the coronavirus right now.
Yes, not entirely sure. Um,
North Korea. I'll have to nip by and have a look next time I'm out.
yes, good luck with that.
Excuse me, some Thai. Which way to the border? I'd like to head to North Korea. I'd like to see Mr. Kimmy. If he can best me in a game of tiddlywinks, well, I'll tell him where I keep
Anyway,
my gold.
anyway, so obviously I've given my kind of wide view take, but you keep more up to date with the actual specifics of what's going on a day-to-day basis in Hong Kong. So what's your kind of take on how things have been unfolding again?
Right, so they've had a massive rally drill protest. That's the word I'm looking for, right? They had a massive protest, large numbers. I can't give you figures, but it looks like one of those 10,000 plus up to anywhere up to 100,000, right? And you can tell with the Hong Kong protests when there's a lot of them because the police retreat very quickly and don't tend to hang around them. When they're in this giant numbers. We've seen it when 2 million people, 1 million people took to the streets. They're very aggressive, they throw things, they don't run up and like mob people like we see in the USA and in the West in some places these days. I mean, don't knock it past anybody. Everybody's due a little bit of chaos these days. But right now in Hong Kong, you see these big demos come along and they very often seem to already have police deployed before these protests take hold. And those protests, you don't really hear much from them. I'll be watching these social media groups and they have live updates, you know. You sit there and you watch it, the chat is scrolling past in Mandarin, it's going really fast, there's memes, there's locations, there's video coming out and so forth, and you can farm it all and make some really crazy dystopian mixed content out of it. But we're seeing that I feel like this time around there's less vigor. I imagine a lot of dissidents have been arrested, but it's still it does seem that there are enough people left or enough people to go out there and fill these non-violent protests that are going on. But are there any like individual figures forming and I don't know, would those people get black bagged? There's a lot of talk of that on Hong Kong protest social media. They say, like, this girl has gone missing. We don't know where she is. She was at this protest, now she's gone. And they make a lot of fuss about this, but because it is social media, you don't know whether the genuine aspect of it is very difficult to do, right? So maybe one of the reasons that I'm not noticing any leadership or anything other than anonymous username only social media or group managers releasing stuff, you don't really tend to see any figureheads or anything like that, which is I don't know, perhaps you see that we see the same thing happening with protests in the West now. There are not that many figureheads that really seem to form on either side. It's spooky.
I disagree, actually.
Mate, here's my thing. My view is always very zoomed out and so forth. So if there are some figureheads forming, please educate me. What are we talking about here?
Well, no. More specifically, I couldn't give you names or anything like that. Although Project Veritas has been looking into some of the stuff, the actual organizers that are taking part on the back end, and what that seems to suggest is that it looks very organized, despite there being no visible organizers, because because they want to stay hidden, effectively.
Yes.
And
okay.
what is actually going on is that there's much more of a robust and deliberately hidden network that's going on behind the front end. And I would suggest that the same thing is probably happening in Hong Kong.
Oh, you mean, yes. Different factions have fingers in the pie to cause more drama and so forth from there. I was really just talking about, like, as for a political, because they can stand in elections and so forth. You don't. They do participate in the. Well, I suppose if they took the route of defund the police in Hong Kong, the central government would just say no. Okay, we are getting up to the halfway mark, and I do love the numbers 3 and 0. So, is there any parting statements you'd like to give here before we round off, Sir Rupert?
Well, yes. So just to put a full stop on some of the points and to bring it all together. I think that if there were to be something big that happened in China, then that could end up being a catalyst for many more things happening elsewhere. Particularly because of how so many of our economies are integrated, that even where we have instances of manufacturing taking place within Western countries, if any of the basic goods that go into those manufacturing goods, so let's say steel into the manufacturing goods like cars and such that would be made in Western countries. If that's steel production in China starts to get shut down because of internal trouble, that's going to cause a lot of ripples across the world. And so, not to mention the mimetic value, the symbolic value of a major government being taken down. Top 10 economies, one of them goes down. That's a very big deal.
Especially the leader and the superpower of Asia. And not only to mention that, but China now, today, locked down 11 regions in the, I think the Beijing Greater Province. I forget the name of the Beijing, if Beijing City and Beijing Province is a thing. But in Beijing, they've shut down locked down 11 neighborhoods after they got 11 cases of coronavirus. So what is this, their third or fourth wave now, depending on how you cut it? I mean, how long can they keep this up where they have to take another wave of this stuff, then they have to face the the ongoing drain that is Hong Kong resources, cops, manpower, and obviously all of the press and geo-economic consequences that come from there being so many ongoing protests and unrests in Hong Kong.
And the attention, don't forget that, because an important element of being able to actually manage and organize responses to things that are going on the ground is actually being able to put time into them. And so if your attention is entirely focused elsewhere, then you're not going to be able to respond to other things that are happening in the background.
Yeah,
I think that's probably deliberate.
How much of Xi Jinping's time is spent dealing with bullshit from Hong Kong? I bet he sees it on his desk, or he's getting his little nicely dressed secretary to tell him what he's got on the agenda for today, and she's going to say, well, today in Hong Kong is going to be the first thing she says to him for, the next 2 years, 3 years? How long can he handle this sort of thing? Because a media blackout, all of the supposed financial institutions leaving the area, or, just Hong Kong not becoming as it was, and, perhaps degrading and all of this, the Hong Kong people are going to remember that basically forever if he really screws them over. So, I don't know. I feel like this time, Sir Rupert, you have definitely won me over to China's prospects not being as ascendant as they previously looked. I'm not fully over there yet because they still do have the majority of, well, not even the majority. It is a majority, but it's a very big majority of the world's industry power. I feel like because they are the only ones who can produce many of the world's products, raw resources processing, not to mention techno gadgets and high and low end industry, right? I feel like those guys are the only guys who can bounce back. We need them because they have the medical equipment that they copied from the German medical industry. I feel like that and the centralized system will be quicker to respond than perhaps Western democracies will. I mean, just look at how bad the coronavirus has hit the USA. I know there's inflated numbers in some places, but even if we get rid of 30% of the inflated numbers, the numbers are huge on who has got this virus, how quick it is transmitting, and people are out there protesting on the streets. hopefully catching coronavirus. Oops, sorry, did I mean that? I'm not sure.
Yes.
Some problems take care of themselves, right?
Well, assuming this all isn't just pulling the wool over our eyes, this whole coronavirus situation, which is also possible. Everything's in play. Nothing is certain at this point, it seems.
Yeah, you never know what old Uncle Tom is up to with the bankers. Okay, here's what I will say in closing. Everybody stay in bunker mode. Just let all the nut jobs, idiots, ideologues of their side, their enemy, the state agents, the giant left, the radical centrists, whoever they are, let them do their little statue pull downs or defences. Let them smash at each other with bats and mace and film it all on social media. Let them continue to do it. Don't get angry. Don't be pulled into this nonsense, because the system that is out there now is already targeted at people like us, and I'll leave it at what that means is up to you, but it's best right now to just wait and see where the wind takes the fire next, because if it comes in our direction, it will be because of some large event and an overreaction by both the state and centre and the left calling, "Oh my god, I can't believe this." You know the words that they use to describe us. Just keep your nose clean. What would you say to that, Rupert?
Yes, I would echo that sentiment quite strongly.
I mean, they are embarrassing themselves so much at the Chaz right now. It's quite funny.
Yeah, well, exactly. We want the Chaz to continue for as long as possible, so that they can continue to decredit themselves and discredit themselves. The worse it gets for the central government in response to their own actions in supporting these kinds of lefty activists is the quicker they will come to the right to try and help them out. There's a strong precedent for that in the past, and so it's certainly not another question that would happen again in the future.
Well said. Go and check out rupertaugustworks.com, is that correct?
Indeed.
Excellent content there, some written stuff, some analysis stuff. Go and check it out. He's got a channel too, of course. Thank you very much for joining us as always, Rupert. We have a very data-rich episode this time, but yes, thank you, take care, and thanks for joining and listening along.
Thank you very much.